Okay, all right. I tend to be pretty interactive in these things, so if you'll just humor me for a second. My name's Steve. I head up product marketing at Guru. Really excited about today's topic. It's something I've lived and breathed for a really long time, so excited to dive in. Before we start, though, I would ask, hopefully you're not in too much of a post-lunch coma here, for everyone to just humor me and close your eyes for a second. We're going to do a little visualization. So most of you are either in sales enablement or product marketing, really tough, dynamic jobs. So let's put yourself in a day of the life, right? So you wake up, head to work. First thing, you find out that a competitor of yours has launched a competitive feature, right? Your VP of sales is freaking out. Next thing you know, your rep that you've been working really closely on a six-figure deal, close lost. Right? A lot of one-on-one coaching with him, very difficult. And the next thing you know, your CEO is asking why win rates are slipping, right? I think all of these scenarios probably apply to most of you. Very, very challenging, dynamic role. Now let's say you need a breather, right? Gonna go outside, gonna get some coffee. So you walk outside, open the door. As you all open your eyes, this is the first thing you see on the corner of the street. Say you're walking down Market, somebody handing out flyers. You're probably met with a whole bunch of different emotions. Angst, anxiety, put your head down, don't look, don't make eye contact, right? It's something that happens to us almost every day, especially for those of you who live in San Francisco. So what's interesting about this is the other week, I observed this very thing happening. And what was interesting was I sat back and watched it happen for a little while and was wondering, why are people even picking up these flyers? Just getting thrown in people's faces. Not to my surprise, about 30 feet behind was a garbage can, overflowing with the one-sheets. And I had this epiphany. I was like, this is how a lot of people treat modern sales enablement. Content, 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 right? One-sheets, data sheets, product FAQs, you name it, just throwing them in people's faces. And it just kind of dawned on me that, where sales enablement was, where it is today, it's changed a lot. So we're going to walk through the history of sales enablement a little bit, talk specifically about some of that change, and we'll revisit this towards the end. So what's interesting about sales enablement is as a function, raise your hand if you're in sales enablement in the room. Okay, you've all chosen very wisely, because as a function, it is booming. It's a great time to be in the role. CSO Insights puts out awesome data. Would definitely check out the work of the Miller-Hyman Group. They put out a survey that said 59% of the respondents have a dedicated enablement function. This was in 2018. In 2013, that number was only 19%. On top of that, they estimate, HubSpot estimates $66 billion spent annually on sales training and enablement technology. So this is clearly a burgeoning field. There's a lot of great energy around sales enablement. So like I mentioned, awesome time to be in the role. But there's a giant disconnect, right? And so when you see this investment into the role and into the technology, and then you look at the numbers, quite a stark contrast. So again, pulling some data here from CSO Insights, 77% of these survey respondents said salespeople don't understand their company's value to their prospects. Topo also puts out awesome data. 71% of sales reps say they don't have enough knowledge to move deals forward. And then only 58% of reps are making quota. That's the killer, right? That's the big one. That's why we do what we do. And it's interesting because, it was so interesting. I walked in and one of the questions I overheard on the panel was what's sales training versus sales enablement? There's a ton of confusion. And despite being formally defined for the first time, in 2008, people still, every time I do one of these, people ask, how do you define sales enablement? I'm sure everyone gets that from their peers. No one knows, right? And the vendor landscape is a complicated mess of a bunch of different types of technology. So what's changed? I did a clean decade here, but since 2008, right? I don't know how many of you out there were working in sales enablement or something similar to sales enablement or sales in 2008. A lot's changed. It's crazy. I mean, we talk about like the rise of the cloud, but it happened so fast. Just 10 years ago, the desktop was king. You had your desktop, you had your email client, you had one or two portals, you had your phone. That was it, right? And as enablement professionals, our reps needed to adapt their behavior to fit these technologies. We'd ship code every quarter, at best, right? Things moved much, much slower. And there was a lot less information about your product out on the internet. So because of that, sellers were really dependent on content to help educate their buyers. Fast forward today. If you were to open up your, who has over 10 tabs open on their computer right now? Yes, a lot's changed, like I said. The web browser is king. Everyone has SaaS applications. Everyone's living and working in so many different places. And that's a real challenge for us in enablement. It's a real challenge because anytime we buy a tool and we ask a rep, go there to find the thing, they're never going to do it. Because that's the 11th or the 12th or the 13th place they need to go. They're prospecting in LinkedIn. They're in Gmail. They're in SalesLoft or Outreach. They're in Slack. They're inundated with tools and information. To make matters worse, our dev teams are shipping code constantly. Things are changing. Product updates, process updates. Things are moving faster than ever. And I'm sure we're all familiar with this data point, but our buyers are more educated than ever. 60% of the buyer journey completed before they even talk to our reps. So what does that all mean? There are a lot of definitions about sales enablement. This one comes from Forrester. It is by far my favorite. So we'll kind of like break this down slowly. They define sales enablement as a strategic, ongoing process that equips all client-facing employees with the ability to consistently and systematically have a valuable conversation. Super, super, super interesting. There are a couple pieces of that we're going to dissect as we go through this. But the first is all client-facing employees, right? Not sales reps, not a specific sales team, anyone who can communicate with a customer. And the second centers around a valuable conversation, which we'll get into a lot more here. So, what's super interesting about this as a buyer of technology as well is I'm sure we've all experienced this firsthand. And I think back to 5 or 6 years ago, I was really hot on this one particular piece of technology. I had done all my research. I was ready to roll, lined up the introduction call, go through 10 to 15 minutes of discovery, solid discovery, and stop the rep. And I said, hey, I'm like bought into a lot of this. I get you have to do your discovery. Before we jump into a demo, though, I've got 3 questions. One, is your API going to work with our product? I work for a data product. I needed to bring that data from that tool into our product. 2 was a specific security question. And the third was around predictive analytics and what they claimed, that was just what we called AI back then. Couldn't answer either of those questions. I had to stop him and say, hey, listen, totally cool. These are non-starters for me. I need to know before I waste any more of your time with the demo. What ended up happening was we shook hands, we walk away. I ended up buying a competitor. I had the demo the next day. That rep was ready to roll, had answers to all of those questions, moved the conversation forward, kept me engaged, ended up buying that product. So we think about the conversation, right, and the role of the conversation, and we get so tied up in prospecting or pipeline management. They actually spend a third of their day talking to prospects. And there's also interesting data that says in this world of email and everything else, 41% still say the phone is the most effective sales tool as buyers. Yet, 85% of prospects and customers are dissatisfied with their phone experience. So, I'm fortunate enough to work with a great sales leadership team. And the other day, I had another epiphany when our director of sales at Guru said, content is a crutch. And I said, yeah, you're right. That makes sense. Content is a crutch. And we invest so much time up front in learning and development and training. How do we make sure that that's like a sustained, ongoing enablement? And how do we make sure that our reps actually understand what they're talking about and aren't dependent on some one sheet that they then send to their prospect? What was super interesting about this conversation was he actually stopped me and said, no. It's not a crutch for our reps. It's a crutch for our buyers. And light went off. And, I've always thought of enablement as, teaching our reps how to fish. But now I'm sitting back like, yep, with 6, 7 people involved in every buying decision, how many of those do we have direct access to? How many of those do we actually have on the phone where we can ensure that our narrative comes across really crisp and clear, that our differentiators come across, that we're hitting on all the things that we're wanting, that we're injecting the customer stories we want? And it dawned on me, like, really, if you think about enablement, we should not only be equipping our reps to have valuable conversations, but for our buyers to have conversations internally. And speaking of crutches, like a Ron Swanson meme, I get the irony there because that's a cheap laugh. But yeah, this was a really interesting moment with sales leadership at our company, and it's got me thinking all sorts of new things about enablement that I'm super excited to chat about. So this is one of my favorite slides. We show it to our reps all the time. And what it does is it helps for them unpack what it is that they need to be successful, right? And again, you talk to any rep, give me the one sheet, give me the data sheet, another case study, all well and good. All well and good, and it certainly has its place. But when you think about what is actually required to move a deal and a conversation forward, there's all sorts of knowledge that is often overlooked that we don't think about in enablement roles. Process knowledge, right? How do I prospect at this stage? I'm in Salesforce. I'm moving it to from discovery into qualification. How do I, what do I do in Salesforce? How do I communicate that to our buyer? Conversational knowledge, right? How do I handle this objection? How do I handle the competitive question? How do I handle that security question? And then product knowledge, right? And like I mentioned, shipping code every week, every 2 weeks, things are changing so fast. How do we make sure that our reps are up to date on all the things that are happening around our product? And when you actually extend this across a buyer journey, I'm sure this would look very different for everyone in this room, but you can start to think about the internal and the external across each stage of the buyer journey, right? So when you're an SDR and you're prospecting, you need your persona information. You need to understand the pain points and the objectives of a persona. You need qualification questions in case they answer your cold call. Then you move into discovery. You need a different set of discovery questions. You need sales playbooks. You need to figure out, okay, what are the different demo plays if they want to jump into a demo? Here's where content comes in. So you've done your prospecting, you've had a great demo, you've had a great conversation. You need content to cement and reinforce that conversation. That is the role of content in sales enablement these days. So that's not to say there isn't a place. Content's very important, but we often over-index on the bottom of this line, and we don't equip and enable our people to handle the top. And another interesting thing is as you extend this across the buyer journey, you start to get into CS and support, which we'll talk about again in a second. But I really think going back to that Forrester, equipping all client-facing employees with the ability to systematically have a valuable conversation still summarizes the work we do in enablement better than anything. So how do we start to measure conversational success? So I'm sure all of us have data teams or work with data directly. Who here uses cohort analysis? Get a show of hands. 2. Okay. If you take nothing else out of this, understand the power of cohort analysis for your enablement reporting. So cohort analysis is you're basically grouping people up into, what we do is onboarding class. So if you're onboarding 5, 10, 15, 20 reps at a time, you're capturing those as different cohorts. I joined a company 5 or 6 years ago, and one of the first things that the VP of sales told me is we're going to go from 9 to 90 on the client-facing side. You're going to have to onboard all of them. Okay, all right. And one of the mistakes I made early on was not taking into account the outliers. There are always going to be reps that just come in and just do really, really, really well. And at the same time, there are always going to be those that lag behind, those that don't work as hard, those that don't go through the training the same way. What cohort analysis allowed us to do is start to measure our success as an enablement function on a more holistic level. So we could actually see, as we refine our onboarding process, as we refine all of our ongoing enablement, are we making a material difference from class to class to class? Because again, there are always going to be those outliers. Another thing I'd consider is defining some custom metrics. So one thing that we love to do is scorecard our rep conversations. So we'll talk in a second about tools, but the conversational intelligence tools, Chorus, Gong, incredibly valuable for sales enablement. And what we're able to actually do is go through and scorecard conversations. So we look back, we see those conversations, we can scorecard them. We can start to understand how well they're handling objections, how well they're actually communicating product value, how well they're injecting customer stories. This is not only a great measurement of conversational success, but it's also great to inform further enablement activities. We can start to figure out, where are we weak within the context of a conversation? And, a lot of great role-playing inspiration out of that as well. Another way to measure time to second deal. It's a really, really, really strong and powerful indicator. Again, a mistake I made was time to first deal. Some people get lucky. Some get a deal handed to them on a silver platter. Time to second deal is a much better indicator of, are we having good conversations? Are we engaging people? Are we actually closing those deals? Deal velocity. So I spoke about this earlier. But one of the biggest benefits to being good within the context of a conversation is we keep the deals moving. So going back to that conversation I had with that sales rep, if he had been able to address my security question, if he had been able to address the API question, we would have moved on, right? The best case scenario there, we're slowing the deal down with another conversation. He came back, he said, well, I need to talk to my sales engineer, I need to talk to my security team, I'll go grab a data scientist, I'll figure out how the predictive analytics stuff works. He sent me a one sheet on their predictive analytics. I don't even think I ever opened it, right? It didn't matter. You lost me. You had me. I was engaged. I was ready to roll. And again, at best, all he's doing is slowing that deal down. And we know how important sales velocity is. The other is directly related to that, number of calls held per close one opportunity. So if it's taking us 8, 9, 10 calls to close a deal in a certain segment, I say segment because that's obviously very dependent on the size of the deal, we can start to assess whether or not those conversations are more valuable if we're moving people down our funnel faster. So the conversational toolkit. So we can talk about this stuff all we want. At the end of the day, we need to start figuring out how to actually implement some of these. Some of it's just ideology, but there is a core set of tools that really, really help think about enablement and measure enablement through this lens. So the first is live chat. And again, we talk about all the different places that reps work these days. Live chat for sales was not a thing even 2-3 years ago. Intercom, Drift pop-up, and now it's a real opportunity. And companies that seem to do that really well put themselves at a huge competitive advantage. But that opens yourself up to more conversations, certainly requires enablement through that lens. The second, I can't recommend highly enough. If you do not use a conversational intelligence tool, I would highly recommend checking them out. Chorus and Gong are the two that I would recommend. Again, just the ability to scorecard, to run playlists, to look for certain keywords. If you think your reps are struggling within a conversation on a specific objection, or when SOC 2 came out, SOC 2 compliance, right? Like that was a big whole thing for us in enablement. And so we just set up trackers to go and ping us whenever that comes up in a deal. We can just quickly jump right to the conversation, the point in the conversation where that comes up. Super, super, super valuable. And the third is real-time knowledge management. And this is interesting. Knowledge management is not something that enablement people think about very often, but really just like whether you're using Atlassian Confluence or something along those lines, being able to get that just-in-time information in front of a rep during that conversation is critical. Whether it be the competitive battle card, or whether it be a quick product FAQ, or, are we SOC 2 compliant? Yes, just having that at the fingertips of a rep in the moment is absolutely critical. And that's the distinction between knowledge and content. So what's actually next for enablement? So going back to the point I made earlier, that Forrester definition that I love so much, what we're starting to see is a huge trend, especially in smaller, faster growing companies, of enablement as a function starting to enable more than just sales, CS, account management, customer support. And when you think about it, Forrester also talks about a customer continuity curve. And the concept is your buyers have questions. They don't care who answers them, right? Whether they're working with a sales rep on a deal and they spun up a free trial and they have a question, they're going to reach out to the rep, not support, right? And vice versa. Maybe they hear about a competitor and they write into support and say, hey, how are you different than them? What you need to do is ensure that all of your customer-facing employees can have that conversation, going back to that Forrester quote. The second, we just talked about conversational tools to help drive rep productivity in the moment, whether it be conversational intelligence tools, live chat, knowledge management, thinking about how I can make them their best versions of themselves in that moment, answer questions, handle objections, move deals forward, right? Again, they spend a third of their day doing that. Why not invest from an enablement standpoint in making themselves successful in those scenarios? And again, I just talked about this, but the role of real-time knowledge management. Sales enablement as a category is very confused. And sometimes people will be like, why doesn't one tool do it all? There's a lot of answers to those questions, but these are complicated problems that all these different tools are trying to solve. And it's important to understand that sales enablement is not a specific product. Though it is addressed as a category, there are many different types of products within sales enablement. I was at dinner with a colleague of mine who's our growth marketer, and he said, you talk about sales enablement, reminds me of account-based marketing. And for those that don't know, account-based marketing, same thing. It can mean paid ads, it can mean direct mail, and everything in between. It's often people will say, I need ABM software. What does that mean, right? So really starting to think about the nuances within the category is really critical. So content is king for content marketers, but conversations are the lifeblood of sales. That is it. Thank you very much. All right, I'm here. Any questions? Yes?
You're working with partner sales teams, it's not a direct sales team. How do you still go about enabling them and measuring success when you're not within that organization?
Right. Do you have access to any of that data or no?
In most cases, no.
Okay. I think in those moments, there are certain technologies that are really helpful in terms of like sharing resources. The one thing I'd recommend is being super clear on the goals. So is there like a referral goal that you have?
Probably like shared sales goals in some ways. Is there sales teams working with our sales team to sell?
And do you have direct access to that sales team? Like, can you do a training for them, or is it virtual training sometimes? Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if there's a great answer to it. What I would say is definitely try to do the same. I think cohort analysis could be really helpful there, even if you're encouraging the partner to start thinking about it that way. And you can see, as you continue to invest in enabling your partner team, are groups of reps actually getting better? Are they hitting those shared sales goals more and more as you continue to do some training with them? Yeah. Sorry, I think you were next.
So back to your concept of client-facing conversations and the people who have those. Obviously, some of these tools that we're talking about in this presentation and others have to do with sort of the sales mindset, how selling learns, how they apply what they've learned to sort of moving a deal forward rather than just pure communication.
Totally.
What do you have to say about other entities inside a company that are not sales-based but have client-facing conversations? Can the same thing be applied? Is it a little different? Is it totally different?
Yeah, great question. I think it's a little bit different. So one of the first things I think that we've observed is the access to like resources or to knowledge that a sales rep actually needs spans an entire organization. So SOC 2 was a big example of that, right? Like, do you want to go to your marketing team or your sales leadership team to get like very nuanced, specific security questions, or do you want to go straight to the source? So I think to answer the first part of your question, try to invest, if you're looking from a technology standpoint, invest in, and a lot of the sales enablement vendors have done a great job building integrations where they can actually pull things in from those respective teams. So you don't necessarily need to get your product team or your security team into that tool. Instead, you work where you work, but my reps have what they need. And remind me the second part of your question again.
Just non-selling entities that have conversations with
like a support rep
or marketing, or customer marketing, or engineering, something like that.
Is another one. Yeah, product design. They do UX research. Yeah, another good question. I think it's definitely different. Comp structure alone will dictate different behavior, so it's important to know that. I think ultimately, again, for us and the way we think about it, like it all comes down to the knowledge you need to do your job. That knowledge is shared. The behavior is very different, and it's really important to recognize that. A support rep can take more time on a conversation if a sales rep has, a booked calendar and needs to get through as many meetings as possible. So I think understanding the behavioral differences is big. Yes.
So first, really enjoyed this presentation.
Awesome. Thank you.
When it comes to shifting enablement, focusing on conversations versus content, I'm curious, like how you guys are using that voice data when it comes to, like, you do a training on having a better conversation. How are you tracking that that's actually working? How are you tracking that's implementing? Who owns following up on that with that voice, like voice intelligence? Is enablement actively listening to call recordings, or is that more your sales managers? I'd love to hear more about that process.
Awesome question. It's a partnership. Enablement's like very involved in that, but we try to empower sales management to have that and just report back to us on that. So one of the things I love, and we use Chorus, one of the things I love about Chorus is you can actually create playlists or have it flag certain words, right? So when we're launching a new product, we put that in there, and we can actually jump in and create playlists. So we go through that, and sales engineering also helps scorecard different demos and different conversations. So we've just really codified that process and track that pretty closely. And the sales managers review that directly with the reps. Yes?
Can you speak a little bit to sort of retraining folks on their dependency to sending content out before answering a question? Your example of the one sheet being sent to you because they didn't have the answer. How can we retrain people to, maybe if they do send out the content, to keep the conversation going, keep it engaging, even if they don't have the answer?
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for that. It's really hard. It's really, really hard because it is definitely a crutch, and it would be for any of us in the room. I think the most success I've had has been flipping that the way we kind of like talked about it today, which is like, do you want to put this 6-figure deal on the line of like this one sheet of paper? Like, is that how you want your champion to go to the sponsor? And it's like with no other context. So I think that's been really helpful for us internally, just kind of like shifting the narrative around enablement, and just a lot of role playing. A lot of role playing. I can't stress that enough. Like, do as much of that as possible until the reps are like tired of it, right? So I also think sharing best practices around that has been really helpful. So Chorus and Gong also allow you to snip out different pieces and examples of, hey, we've been getting this one really, really tough objection, or we have a new competitor. And when you start to see reps do that really, really well and be super consultative, share those best practices and like reward reps for that. We actually do trainings where like they'll walk you through it and give you a play-by-play in front of the entire team. That's been really successful too. Of course.
And I would suggest that that's more potentially a sales training issue, because there's a fundamental give to get, right? I spent most of my time, I'm sure some of you guys that have carried a bag, when you're training your sales engineer to pitch correctly, for God's sake, do not answer every question that the customer has on the spot. I need a reason to go back. I need a reason for them to call me back. So it's not your job to be customer service in many cases. So when you can't answer a question, sellers need to feel comfortable having the parking lot. It's a reason to stay hooked. It's a reason to come back to them. It gives you ability to build credibility. I will get this to you on Tuesday. I could probably send it to you right now, but if I wait until Tuesday and I send it, I'm building credibility. It depends, I guess, on the sales motion that you have. But in an enterprise motion, I would suggest if their goal is to answer every question as it's coming, they're just hoping that the product sells itself. In reality, they're not exhibiting salesmanship. It's a craft at the end of the day. So
it's a great point.
On a craft perspective. Just me.
Really good point.
All right, cool.
All right.
Well, thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah, thank you.
All right, guys. So I guess we are on.